It all started innocently enough, the way these things often do. My off-grid cabin in the Sierra foothills had been a sanctuary for years, a quiet retreat far from the buzz of the city, powered entirely by a modest solar array I'd set up myself. It wasn't anything fancy. 6 panels, a couple of lithium batteries, a modest inverter, and a few energy-saving habits honed through trial and error. The place was rustic, efficient, and most importantly, mine. Then came Karen. Her real name wasn't Karen, of course, but the nickname stuck the moment she rolled into our HOA-managed private mountain community with her $80,000 Tesla Model S and a chip on her shoulder. You could feel the disruption in the air the way animals sense a storm. She introduced herself at the general meeting with all the charm of a traffic citation, rattling off complaints about gravel dust, unmowed easements, and how her cell signal wasn't as strong as it should be given how much she paid for the place. The rest of us lived up here precisely because of the lack of those things. Karen's cabin, newly purchased and heavily mortgaged no doubt, sat downhill from mine. Technically within the wall limits, but just far enough that I'd hoped I wouldn't be seeing much of her. Unfortunately, she made it her mission to upgrade the community. She lobbied for paved roads. She griped about deer. She insisted on calling the local volunteer fire chief about inadequate hydrant spacing, even though we don't have hydrants, just ponds and dry hydrants hooked to cisterns. But the last straw wasn't any of that. It was her Tesla. It started with little things. First, I noticed my inverter fan kicking on more frequently than usual. At first, I chalked it up to the July heatwave. Then, one morning, I checked my battery status via the monitoring app while sipping my coffee and realized my overnight draw was way higher than it should have been. I hadn't been running anything out of the ordinary, just the fridge and the satellite router, maybe a fan. But the usage graph looked like I was running a clothes dryer for 5 hours straight. That's when I started to get suspicious. I did a walk around, checked for anything left on, maybe the deep freezer door hadn't closed properly. Nothing. Everything was as it should be. The next morning, same thing. Even lower battery levels. One night, I even flipped the breakers to the fridge and the internet just to test. Still, a huge draw. So I installed a small security camera under the awning, aimed at the side of the cabin where the external outlets were. And sure enough, the next morning when I checked the footage, there she was, Karen, in designer hiking boots and an oversized sun hat, pulling up in her Tesla at 3:17 a.m. like a silent eco-bandit. She parked, got out, and like it was her personal gas station, she plugged her luxury car into my solar-powered cabin. And then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, she walked away. Left it there for 3 hours, came back just before sunrise, unplugged it, and drove off. I was stunned. Who just does that? This wasn't the charging station at Whole Foods. This was my self-sustained power system, designed carefully to balance a refrigerator, some lights, maybe a hot plate or two. A Tesla battery could suck up a day's worth of energy in a few hours. And she'd been doing this for at least 3 nights that week, I later learned from the footage logs. So, I confronted her. Politely, at first. Hey Karen, I said the next day when I caught her walking her hypoallergenic poodle mix near my trailhead. Just wanted to let you know I noticed someone's been using my power outlet. That's for my system. It's not set up for vehicle charging. She blinked at me like I'd spoken Mandarin. Oh, was that yours? I assumed it was, like, a communal plug. Communal. As if mountain cabins had public EV charging stations tucked behind latticework. I kept my voice calm. It's not. I live off-grid. That's solar. My system is balanced to power my own equipment. You could damage the batteries or worse. She rolled her eyes. Well, if it's that sensitive, maybe you should label it or something. You can't just put power out in the open and expect people not to use it. It was like arguing with a crow over who owned the shiny spoon. No accountability. No apology. She just kept insisting she didn't know, and that I should have made it clearer. I explained, Once again, that off-grid power isn't like grid power. It's finite, delicate, and it literally sustains my septic system pump. If the batteries drop too low, the waste tank can't process and drain. The whole system is linked. If it fails, I'm dealing with a very literal mess. Oh, she said, lips pursed. That sounds like a design flaw. That's when I knew I was dealing with someone who wasn't just oblivious, she was entitled. I made a plan. Next day, I added a lock to the outlet panel. That would have been the end of it if Karen were the kind of person who respected boundaries. But no. 2 days later, I found the lock broken and the plug lying on the ground. She'd come back, with tools. I checked the camera again. She'd used bolt cutters. That was war. What she didn't know was that I had a backup power relay system connected to the gray water and septic pump. My system was smart, sure, but it was also simple. When battery power dropped too low, a relay would kick on and divert any available juice to the septic pump's failsafe circuit to ensure proper cycling. In short, if you steal too much power, the pump activates and runs the emergency flush cycle, an aggressive process that forces a series of valves to open and close rapidly, sucking up as much current as it needs. That power spike is designed to preserve health standards, not system longevity. So I tweaked the settings a little. Calibrated the inverter to trip the relay sooner. Next time she came to charge. Let's just say the system kicked in mid-charge, drawing back power from her vehicle like a parasitic leech. She must have gotten an alert on her Tesla app. Or maybe she noticed the awful churning noise from the tank pipe below the cabin. Either way, she bolted. That was the last time she ever plugged into my cabin. She was back again, as if nothing had happened the first time. Same white Tesla, same smug expression that hovered between entitlement and obliviousness. I watched from behind the curtain of my cabin window, coffee in hand, as the gleaming EV nosed up my gravel driveway for the third time this week. This time, she didn't even knock. She stepped out of her car, clicked open the charging port with a well-practiced flick of her nail, and marched straight toward the outlet on the side of my cabin, the one she now apparently considered public property. It had started innocently enough, or at least passively. 2 weeks ago, I'd come back from a supply run in town to find her car already parked, plugged into my off-grid solar setup. No note, no explanation. Just that soft, high-pitched whine of electricity feeding her vehicle like a parasite attached to an unsuspecting host. I confronted her, of course, and she delivered her now infamous line. Well, technically, it's clean energy, right? It's not like I'm costing you money. That, technically, did a lot of heavy lifting. Now, there's something you should understand about my setup. This cabin isn't just a weekend getaway. I live here, full-time, year-round. I built this system myself, balancing panels, batteries, and a water filtration unit with careful precision. Every amp counts. What Karen didn't understand, or didn't bother to learn, is that this wasn't some infinite tap of green juice she could siphon into her overpriced appliance. It was a closed-loop system, delicately engineered not just to power lights and gadgets, but to support a living system. Namely, my septic tank. The septic system relies on an oxygenation process to break down waste. Without steady power, the aerator shuts off, and the whole tank starts behaving like an open wound. I don't expect someone from the suburbs to understand that. But by the second time she drained my battery bank overnight, I was seeing real signs: backup in the plumbing, a foul whiff near the drain field, and worst of all, the monitor's red light blinking like a heartbeat in cardiac arrest. So I decided to let her keep plugging in. I didn't warn her. I didn't chase her off. I simply removed the surge regulator from the system and rerouted the secondary overflow sensor line directly to the backup inverter. That way, the more she drained power for her silent cruiser, the more likely it was that the system would misfire, and when it did, the septic overflow pump would seize up. It was no longer a question of if. That morning, as I stood inside and sipped my coffee, I heard the faint click of her Tesla initiating the charge cycle. I waited. 15 minutes in, my control panel beeped once, soft, almost apologetic. She was drawing at a high rate again, pulling power from the backup store, dipping well below the threshold. The septic pump, ever faithful, started laboring to engage, but with insufficient juice, it jammed. Then came the noise. From the back of the property, just past the line of pines near the composting area, a low, gurgling sound bubbled up like some monster from a swamp. The tank had overflowed. Not violently, yet, but steadily, with a lazy, bubbling churn that signaled trouble below. Karen, blissfully unaware, had now decided to make herself comfortable. She sat on the Tesla's hood, scrolling through her phone, sipping a thermos of something peppermint-colored. I stepped outside, waving like I was welcoming an old friend. "Lovely day," I said. "Oh hey," she chirped. "I figured you wouldn't mind if I topped off real quick. I've got that HOA board meeting down in Boulder, and I don't want to get stuck." I nodded, slowly. "Totally understand. Gotta keep the community running." She gave a little laugh, not catching the irony. "Exactly. You get it." That's when the first whiff reached her. She paused mid-sip, nose wrinkling. "What is that smell?" I shrugged. "Wet earth, maybe. The septic field's right over there." I gestured vaguely toward the back, where an ominous squelching noise had begun to emerge. Her eyes followed my gesture, then widened. "Is that water?" "Nope," I said. "Not unless you count effluent." She slowly got off the car hood, peering down the slope. A brownish ooze was now visibly seeping from the edge of the tank field, bubbling like a hot spring of doom. She took a hesitant step backward. "Is that dangerous?" she asked, now visibly rattled. "Well," I said, feigning thoughtful concern, "the system works fine when there's enough power. But lately, someone's been drawing more than their share, and the pump just can't keep up." Her eyes darted to the charging cable. Then back to me. "You're saying I caused this?" I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't say that. But you," she stopped. "Why didn't you tell me it was connected to that?" I gave her the same look she gave me 2 weeks ago. "Well, technically, it's all just clean energy, right? Not like it costs you anything." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked down at her pristine white sneakers, now inches away from the creeping edge of what was definitely not mud. Panic set in. "I need to unplug," she said quickly, moving toward the cable. "Be my guest," I said, watching as she tugged at the cord. But the charge lock had engaged. Teslas, in their infinite intelligence, don't like to let go mid-cycle without the app. And judging from the increasingly frantic taps on her phone, Karen had either forgotten her password or lost signal. Probably both. That's when the tank burped. A low, hollow gloom, followed by a viscous splatter across the lower path. She jumped back, shrieking. The Tesla, still connected, stood like a gleaming monument to urban arrogance in a world it didn't understand. I didn't laugh. Not outwardly. Eventually, she got it unplugged, fingers shaking, shirt spattered with something that would need 3 dry cleaning cycles and a prayer. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't offer thanks. She didn't even wipe her shoes before getting back into her car. But she did leave. That was 3 days ago. The septic's stabilized since then. I fixed the surge control and added a bypass lock to the outlet, just in case. As for Karen, I heard through the local co-op she's been petitioning the HOA to install communal EV chargers at the lakefront park. Let them deal with her. I'll stick with my tank, my panels, and my peace. Because out here, you learn, everything's connected. Even when people don't understand the cost.